I'm going to talk about how America wrecked Britain and China's golden age, because we did have one. Our British Defence Secretary John Healey, high on the new car smell rising from the HMS Prince of Wales aircraft carrier docked in Australia at the weekend, blustered that we are ready to fight. To widespread mockery, Healey delivered his oration on the fantasy threat to Taiwan the moment Prime Minister Anthony Albanese stepped onto yellow peril turf on his diplomatic trade mission to China. John seemed worried that peace might break out. Were John's lurid suggestions of China invading its own province supposed to inject steel into an Oz government wavering under an AUKUS lash-up? It's now shrunk to AUK, now that the US has done a bunk. Some Australians finally twigged the folly of an existential war with their biggest trade partner, not to mention regional superpower, so it's no surprise, therefore, to see them seeking an off-ramp. If only the same could be said of the UK. Britain wasn't always so aggressively determined to wage war on China, certainly not since the Cold War or even the Hong Kong handover, so what changed? In 2010, the BBC allowed me to make a programme for Radio 4, China, Britain and the Nunzilla conundrum. In it, I pointed out that China's days of making our tat were over, and the new kid on the block was about to transition into a world-leading technological giant. How they laughed. What, with all those suicide factories? Ha ha. The timing turns out to be most telling. 2010 is the year of Obama's pivot to Asia, announced in 2011, following declaration of his status as the first Pacific president in a gargantuan territorial pissing statement of intent. It's Hillary Clinton who kicks off the all change with her incendiary speech at the ASEAN Regional Forum in Hanoi on 23rd of July 2010. She initiates the smart power strategy, which means stirring up enmity using carrot and stick to get the rising superpower's neighbours on board to contain China. Dubbing the Chinese end of the Pacific the Western Pacific, the US will later rename it the Indo-Pacific, removing China's presence utterly from its own coastal territory in favour of another Asian country completely round the corner, and as around the bend as Trump's much sneered at renaming of the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. And this is all despite China saving the global economy from America's greed-fueled great crash of 2008, only 2 years previously. Oh yeah, who was it who did the damage? And who was it who rode to the rescue? The BBC greenlighting my programme was a clear signal that, at the time, Britain had no intention of torpedoing their lifeboat and growth engine, just on Obama's say-so. American and UK foreign policy divergence is confirmed later that year after China floats the world economy out of danger. In November 2010, Prime Minister David Cameron and his trade team score a victory in Beijing, ushering in a golden age with China. This is a collaboration that is mutually profitable, peaceful and helps knit together the Eurasia landmass end to end in Belt and Road trade. Remember not so many years ago when food was cheap and plentiful, interest rates were near zero, and supply chains were mwah. In the geopolitical three-body problem that is Europe, China and the US, Italy signs up to BRICS, Duisburg shapes up to become Europe's busiest port, Crimea is granted pole position as a major BRICS hub, while China invests heavily in Ukraine's agriculture. The first freight train from China running the entire length of Eurasia arrives in East London in 2017. Ominously, a declining America, still on the naughty step for its global malfeasance during its great crash, finds its influence considerably curtailed. What with being so well protected by two oceans that it's cut off from the rest of the Northern Hemisphere where all the action's happening, and so dependent on sea and air. If only it had terrific high-speed rail like that lot over there. What, not even 1 kilometre of high-speed rail? And those pesky oceans that keep getting in the way. So go on, guess what happens next? Maybe America accepts China's invitation to join in and keep the party going, as asked by China's ambassador to the US, Tsui Tang-Kai. No. Europe and China have stabilised Eurasia following recession and the near-fatal US crash, harshing everyone's economic mellow. The global economy is rising in sync, and there are very few flashpoints to blow up, slow and steady as it goes. In 2015, Premier Li Keqiang signs Made in China 2025, announced by President Xi to great fanfare. This strategic plan aims to lift China out of its role as world's factory by upgrading manufacturing and innovation, turning itself into a technological powerhouse and earning a place at top table with the big boys. We'll make you so proud of us, they think somewhat naively. I remember shuddering a bit and wondering, did you get an okay from the alpha male? Not that you should be asking permission, but America might not be the proud parent you're hoping for. You can feel the frisson of fury in the West as Made in China 2025 throws the spotlight onto China's beautiful cities, shrinking poverty, a growing middle class, and numerous other achievements. Oh well, I think. You must know what you're doing. Britain continues to resist pressure to give up the golden goose they accessed in 2010. A big yaboo sucks to Obama's neocon pivot. Yay, bring on the Chinese tech. Come on, Huawei and your gorgeous 5G. Rah, Hinkley Point C nuclear power. You are so going to make us world class. We might even get a Chinese-built high-speed rail out of it. China is throwing money at us, investing in little old Britain because it loves us. It loves our style, it loves our queen, our status as former biggest empire the world has ever known. Forget the pokey embassy in Portland Place up the street from the BBC. We're going to need a bigger base. Let's have the Royal Mint as home from home. And then, 2016, Prime Minister David Cameron snatches defeat from the jaws of victory and caves in to right-wing pressure to hold a referendum to leave Europe. Brexit, just the move that would fracture Europe and halt progress in its tracks. American-born Boris Johnson, who doesn't care about anything except his own interests anyway, is pulled both ways. He eventually campaigns for Brexit in front of a red London bus bearing the promise to save $350 million a year for the NHS. Later, Peter Thiel's Palantir and Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and the Donald Trump campaign, which is close to Nigel Farage, are all suspected of links to the outcome. Far from taking back control, 37% of Brits have voted to leap out of the EU frying pan and into the US fire, nailing us to the USS Titanic. They're not burning, but drowning. Still, not to worry, everyone knows it's only a non-legally binding referendum to take the temperature of national opinion and not an actual deciding vote. Over to you, Leader of the Opposition, who is our last-ditch defence against such xenophobic madness. Whatever you do, don't press that big red Article 50 button. Ah, kaboom. The deed done, we may be losing the huge European market as well as considerable political influence in the EU, but hey, at least we have China as backup. Taking us completely by surprise, however, unforeseen by everybody except those of us paying attention, the right and the far right float to Europe's surface, emboldened by the wave of xenophobic reaction sweeping the continent. In Britain, Farage reverses sharply from using trade with a rising China as a bribe for leaving the European Union. Look at lucky Iceland, able to make lucrative deals with China. Leave the EU and we can too. But overnight, post-Brexit vote, China is morphed from strategic partner to competition bogeyman. Preaching conflict with China, Farage's new pet project, sits in alignment with the US neocons and isolationists like his hero, presidential candidate Donald Trump. However, Boris Johnson isn't blind to China's great wealth. A massively overflowing trough, it awaits the likes of clever men like the Prime Minister to free up all that moolah. In addition to the benefits the country enjoys from our golden age relations, Johnson's family has financial interests in China, so Johnson holds out manfully. In his 2005 Telegraph article, in which he scoffed at the Chinese for being incapable of original thought, he wrote, It has become a cliche of geopolitical analysis to say that China is the next world superpower, that the 21st century will belong to Beijing, and that we had better get in tutors to teach our nippers Mandarin if they're to make it in the new world order. By this point, that is Brexit, Britain has invested around £7 billion in Huawei 5G infrastructure, which will secure our place ahead of the pack in the modern tech era. Helping our energy independence now that the North Sea is running out of oil, unfortunately privatised and no longer owned by the nation, there are several nuclear power stations in the pipeline, including Hinkley Point C, which is a third owned by the Chinese, who are investing billions in the UK. However, there's a new sheriff in town, a new clown in the driving seat, a giant blue bottle in the ointment. Choose your own metaphor and stir until shaken. Meet President Donald Trump, a throwback to 1950s nostalgia for a powerful America, Jim Crow, and war on everyone who won't bow down. Or am I confusing him with Nero, or Caligula, or is it Eric Cartman? Whatever, the prognosis isn't looking good for anyone. Brexit Day, 3rd of February 2020. Prime Minister Boris Johnson gives his famous Superman speech at the Old Royal Naval College in Greenwich. It's about future trade agreements and championing free trade now that he's lost us our key neighbouring market. He's ignored US demands on several occasions from Washington figures such as Mike Pompeo only the previous month to drop Chinese investments. Chiefly, this means Huawei's 5G, to which Johnson had just given limited approval, excluding it from military and nuclear sites and keeping it to the uncontroversial phone mast system. The cheeky monkey even has the temerity to comment that America's trade war on China has been letting the air out of the tyres of the world economy. He's not wrong, but this will be the last time Johnson ever shows evidence of a spine, or even original thought. A few days later, Johnson feels the wrath of Trump in a phone call. US Vice President Mike Pence says that the Trump administration had made its disappointment with the UK very clear to them. According to the Sunday Times account of the White House delegation's visit to London in May 2019, the GCHQ team, whose detailed intelligence and technology assessment exonerated Huawei, was given the hairdryer treatment and shouted at by the Americans for 5 hours. The former British ambassador to the US, Kim Darroch, says there were no compelling technical arguments that undermined GCHQ's case and that the US case was political. Nevertheless, Johnson ditches Huawei in June 2020 after Trump bans the company from using US-made chips. Neither Theresa May nor Johnson get a post-Brexit trade deal with the US out of this. What we have now is a far, far cry from the optimism of 2017. And in contrast to the pre-Trump era, Europe is shooting down the Swanee. I don't want to say I told you so, but in 2018 I did write, in order to bring China to heel, Trump would have to break the European Union first. That affects Britain too. Once we're out of the EU, it's unlikely that Trump will allow Britain to trade with China. What was that about Brexit taking back control? The world is stuck between a rock and a hard place, between Scylla and Charybdis. Had Trump not won the 2016 election, the US might not have doubled down on Obama's pivot to China quite so fast. But had Hillary won, Russia would be back where it was after Gorbachev and Yeltsin sold out their own country. Pensioners going unpaid, children addicts living in sewers, really bad Christmas-style jumpers being the height of fashion in Moscow, and quite possibly flattened. With the 4-year Trump pause, they've had time to build up defences against predatory NATO schemes. In the Middle East, the Democrats have already shown their appetite for ruthless cruelty against the Palestinians, so there wouldn't have been much advantage there. Ukraine is a proxy war tragedy. Fuck the EU, said Victoria Nuland to the US ambassador in Kiev just before their 2014 Maidan coup, as I'm fond of reminding everyone. And fuck the EU, they certainly did. The EU, now look at it, it bankrupts itself, throwing money at Zelensky even as he takes the anti-corruption agencies under his control. Germany is deindustrialised by the loss of cheap Russian energy and accepts the Nord Stream pipeline being blown up by allies. Merz wants a replay of Stalingrad with Russia and neglects domestic matters. Ursula von der Leyen has more lives than a cat. She's survived accusations of grift, dodgy Pfizer deals, warmongering galore, and a humiliatingly bad deal with President Trump. She's made a $750 billion commitment over 3 years to buy America's expensive liquid natural gas, even though declining supplies make fulfilling orders highly unlikely. And there's a $600 billion investment tribute to Trump, which he says he can do what he likes with, calling it a gift, not a loan. All that in return for only 15% tariffs. One way, of course. What a bargain. France has been shafted before by the US, previously over the AUKUS nuclear submarine deal. Ursula's agreement to allow the EU market to be prized open for American agrobiz interests has not pleased French farmers at all. NATO chief Mark Rutte calls Trump daddy and dreams of fighting China, presumably from the depths of a luxury nuclear bunker while the rest of us fry. It would be ironic, as well as suicidal, for Britain to now rejoin the EU. Brexit did the damage. Is there really any point jumping back into it as it circles the drain? I think not. Oh, by the way, BRICS is now the largest trade bloc on the planet.